During the cold season of 1873, the German settler group in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, spoke softly about young 11-year-old Emma Richter with quiet, worried voices. This fair, silent girl was able to determine the day of the week for any past date instantly, recall whole talks exactly after hearing them a single time, and state the exact number of strides between any two structures nearby. What today's doctors would call a truly remarkable brain disorder was viewed by the people of 1873 as either a gift from God or something much more evil. But when Emma started using her unusual skills to uncover hidden facts, foresee fatal mishaps, and recount private specifics of unlawful acts that no one alive was thought to have seen, the local people's wonder quickly became fear. By the time spring arrived, 3 men would be lost. One whole family would quickly leave in the darkness, and Emma Richter herself would simply disappear, leaving only a dark notebook full of numerical figures that nobody had the courage to understand. Before we continue with the chilling tale of Emma Richter and the deep secrets her extraordinary mind exposed in Milwaukee's German area, make sure to join our channel and press that alert symbol. We offer you the most memorable historical puzzles every 7 days, and please inform us in the comments what specific state or major city you are currently listening from. These actual events happened in places just like yours, closer to your home than you might think. What the people of Brewery Town did not yet realize was that Emma's talent would reveal a complex network of falsehoods, betrayals, and killings that had been carefully concealed for nearly a decade, and that her perfect mathematical skill would become their community's most terrifying new concern. Milwaukee's German Quarter in 1873 was a busy area of dark red brick breweries, simple wooden houses, and the constant noise of German language mixing with English in the fresh Wisconsin air. The group of almost 8,000 German settlers had successfully created their own little Bavaria along Lake Michigan's edges, complete with beer gardens, traditional sweet shops, and the usual steady rhythms of old country life moved to American ground. The men worked hard in the breweries, Schlitz, Best, and the many smaller firms that made Milwaukee famous, while their wives tended backyard gardens that grew the exact same vegetables their own grandmothers had cultivated in the Rhineland. Heinrich and Greta Richter had arrived from Bavaria in 1861 with strong hopes of success and their baby girl, Emma. Heinrich found constant work as a master beer maker at the Kellner Brewery, a medium-sized company that provided beer to the rapidly growing city's thirsty people. Greta took in laundry and mending jobs to boost their earnings, her quick hands working by candle flame long after Emma had been put to sleep in their small but neat home on Galena Street. The Richters were completely ordinary in every single way except for their young daughter. Emma had been born during the difficult Atlantic Sea journey, 3 weeks too early and so tiny that the ship's medical officer doubted she would fully survive the trip. But survive she did, though she remained thin and pale with massive gray eyes that appeared to absorb everything around her with unsettling intensity. As a young toddler, she rarely cried or demanded focus, content to sit quietly in corners, carefully watching and intently listening as the grown-up world proceeded near her. By the age of 4, Emma's mother and father began to notice something highly unusual. She could perfectly recall full conversations she had heard several days earlier, complete with the exact voice tones and distinct accents of the speakers. She consistently counted everything. The number of specific threads in her mother's sewn designs, the total steps from their main entrance to the sweet shop, the exact time between the brewery whistles that indicated the start and the finish of each workday. When Heinrich taught her simple math, she grasped mathematical ideas with worrying speed, quickly solving complex problems in her mind faster than he could work them out carefully on paper. The German group initially viewed Emma's skills with a mix of great pride and slight worry. Old Mrs. Brennan, who strongly claimed to remember the witch trials in her grandmother's stories, made the sign of the cross whenever Emma's calculating gray eyes focused right on her. But Father Koller, the heavy Bavarian priest who served their small Catholic place of worship, declared Emma's abilities to be a gift from God, a child specially selected to show divine understanding in their New World town. The cold season of 1872 had been especially brutal, with air temperatures dropping so low that Lake Michigan became totally solid ice for the first time in a whole generation. The brewery workers huddled near coal furnaces, their breath clearly visible even inside, while their wives tried hard to keep their families warm and fed throughout the long, harsh months. It was during this separated winter that Emma's skills started to take on a more sinister quality, though no one yet fully understood what was soon approaching. Emma had developed the routine of sitting by the small glass window in their kitchen, carefully watching the neighbors carry out their daily routines with the same deep focus she used for difficult math problems. She began to notice distinct patterns, not just in numerical figures, but in common human actions. Mr. Kruger always walked to the brewery using the exact same path, taking exactly 247 steps, except on Wednesdays when he used a different way that required 284 steps. Mrs. Fisher consistently hung her clean clothes in a specific order, but when her husband worked late at the factory, I changed the pattern. These observations might have been ignored as the odd habits of an unusual child, except that Emma started to voice her discoveries in ways that made the adults increasingly uneasy. The shift from simple curiosity to deep fear began on a dreary February morning in 1873. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, calmly eating her first meal while her mother prepared her father's packed lunchbox, when she suddenly looked up and stated, "Mr. Dietrich will not come back from the brewery today. He will lose his life at precisely 14 minutes past 2 cow." Greta nearly dropped the metal box she was holding. "Emma, dear child, what a terrible thing to declare. Why would you think such a thing?" Emma's gray eyes remained focused on her mother's features with that unsettling intensity. "He has been consistently drinking from the small brown container for 17 straight days. Yesterday he consumed 3 times more liquid than he normally does. His footsteps were uneven, 251 instead of his usual 244. When people change their routines by more than 10%, something serious happens within 72 hours. Mr. Dietrich's routine changed by 12%. The math is simple." Hinrich, who had been putting on his thick wool coat, stopped and stared hard at his daughter. Jon Dietrich was indeed known to drink, but no more than half the men in the German quarter. The thought that Emma had been counting his strides and tracking his drinking habits was worrying enough, but her calm mathematical certainty about his coming death sent a chill through both parents that had nothing to do with the Wisconsin cold. "You must not say such things, Emma," Hinrich stated firmly. "It is not proper for a young child to speak about death." Emma simply nodded her head and went back to eating her breakfast, but her parents exchanged worried looks above her bent head. They had become used to their daughter's unusual remarks, but this felt different, more sinister, and much more definite than her typical mathematical statements. At precisely 14 minutes past 2 that same afternoon, Johann Dietrich suddenly collapsed in the brewery's malt area. The official reason for his death was a severe heart failure caused by what Dr. Mayer determined to be long-term alcohol poisoning. The brewery workers who found him noted that he had been acting oddly for many weeks, drinking much more heavily than usual and showing signs of strong worry. But what truly disturbed them was the precise time. Emma Richter's prediction had been accurate down to the minute. News of Emma's grim prophecy spread through the German quarter like smoke from a burning chimney. Some ignored it as a simple accident, but others recalled the pale girl with the calculating eyes and began to wonder what else she might have observed during her silent watches at the kitchen window. The Richter family found themselves the focus of quiet talks and sideways glances when they walked to church or visited the local market. Father Koller, who had previously praised Emma's skills as divine, now seemed less certain. When Heinrich approached him after Sunday service, looking for advice about his daughter's disturbing prediction, the priest's cheerful manner had been replaced by something closer to worry. "Heinrich, my friend," Father Koller said, his Bavarian accent heavy with concern, "perhaps it would be better if young Emma spent less time watching the neighbors and more time focusing on her religious prayers. The Lord gives us gifts, yes, but sometimes the devil can twist even the most innocent talents toward more evil goals." This suggestion worried Heinrich deeply. He had always been a practical person, more focused on the proper science of beer making than the complex issues of religious faith. But even he could not ignore the unsettling correctness of Emma's prediction. That evening, he sat his daughter down for a serious discussion. "Emma, you must tell me the exact truth. How did you know about Mr. Dietrich?" Emma looked at her father with those massive gray eyes, her facial expression as calm and analytical as it always was. "I watch, I count, I remember." Mr. Dietrich's actions changed in very predictable ways. When someone increases their consumption of alcohol by 37% over a 17-day span, while at the same time decreasing their food consumption by about 20%, severe heart strain becomes unavoidable. I calculated the most likely moment of failure based on his age, body weight, and visible physical signs. Heinrich felt his blood turn cold. His 11-year-old daughter was speaking like an expert medical doctor or something much more troubling. But Emma, how could you know all these specific facts about Mr. Dietrich's eating and drinking habits? "I notice everything, Papa, every day, every person, every pattern." Emma's voice remained calm and factual, but there was something in her eyes that made Heinrich deeply uneasy. "Would you like me to tell you about the other precise calculations I've already made?" Heinrich quickly shook his head. He did not want to know what else his daughter had calculated about their neighbor's existence and eventual demise. But as he helped Emma into bed that night, he couldn't shake the strong feeling that his family was standing right at the edge of something much darker than a simple mathematical interest. The February snow continued to fall outside their small home, muffling the sounds of the German quarter and creating a separated world where secrets could be concealed and observations could be made without anyone knowing. Emma lay quietly in her narrow bed, her mathematical brain constantly working through the day's total data and calculating probabilities that no 11-year-old should be able to fully understand, and certainly no 11-year-old should truly wish to know. In the weeks following Johann Dietrich's death, the general atmosphere in Milwaukee's German quarter shifted like the powerful wind off Lake Michigan. Emma continued her daily intense observations, but now her parents watched her with rising unease as she sat by the kitchen window, her gray eyes following the movements of their neighbors with mechanical accuracy. The child, who had once been their greatest source of pride, had become a source of deep, silent worry. The beer-making community was close-knit by necessity. The men depended on each other for their work, their wives for companionship during the long winters, and their children played together in the small streets between the dark red brick buildings. But Emma had never truly fit into this social world. While the children played various games and told exciting stories, she preferred to sit totally alone, counting and calculating and watching the world around her with that unsettling intensity. Greta began to notice that Emma's observations were becoming more detailed and more disturbing. The child would mention calmly that Mrs. Weber had been secretly meeting with Mr. Kellner behind the brewery on Tuesday afternoons for 6 weeks straight, or that the Schneider family had been burying something wrapped up in their backyard every Sunday after church. When Greta asked how Emma could possibly know such private things, the girl would simply explain that she had observed the distinct patterns and calculated the likelihoods. "People think they are being secretive," Emma said one March morning as she calmly buttered her morning bread, "but they follow distinct patterns just like numerical figures. Mrs. Weber always tells her husband she's going to visit her sister on Tuesday afternoons, but she walks 127 steps to Mr. Kellner's house instead of 349 steps to her sister's house. The Schneiders bury objects wrapped in cloth exactly 73 centimeters apart in a specific grid pattern. They truly believe no one is watching, but I am constantly watching." Heinrich had heard enough. That evening, after Emma was sound asleep, he spoke seriously with his wife about their daughter's increasingly troubling behavior. "Greta, this simply cannot continue. Emma is becoming very unnatural. Children should not notice such things, and they certainly should not speak of them so coldly." Greta nodded her head, her hands shaking as she mended one of Heinrich's work shirts. "I'm genuinely scared, Heinrich. Not of Emma, but of what our neighbors will think. Already the people next door look at us strangely. Mrs. Brennan crossed the street yesterday when she saw me approaching. And Father Koller, he has not visited our house since Jon's death." Their fears proved to be correct when 3 days later Emma made another of her mathematical announcements. She was actively helping her mother prepare their evening meal when she suddenly stopped peeling potatoes and looked up with that familiar calculating expression. "Mrs. Weber will be discovered tomorrow at 11 in the morning. Her husband will find her with Mr. Kellner in the brewery's main office. There will be intense violence." Greta dropped her small peeling tool. "Emma, no, you must not say such terrifying things." But Emma continued with the same mathematical certainty she used for her arithmetic lessons. "Mrs. Weber has been arriving at the brewery 7 minutes earlier each week for 6 straight weeks. Mr. Kellner has been staying 33 minutes later each day. Tomorrow Mr. Weber will return from his delivery trip 47 minutes early because his horse is developing a distinct lameness in her left front leg. I have observed her gait worsening for 11 days. The coming together of these 3 specific variables makes discovery totally unavoidable." Heinrich, who had been listening from the main doorway, felt his chest tighten with growing fear. His daughter was not just observing their neighbors. She was successfully predicting their future experiences with terrifying accuracy. "Emma, how do you know about Mr. Weber's horse?" "I count her steps when she passes our house. On March 1st, she favored her right legs 53% of the time. Today it was 68%. Tomorrow the lameness will be severe enough to slow the delivery route by 47 minutes, forcing Mr. Weber to come back early." The next day unfolded exactly as Emma had calculated. Wilhelm Fubert discovered his wife Anna in a difficult situation with brewery owner Ernst Kellner. The harsh conflict that followed left Kellner with a broken nose and 3 cracked ribs, while Anna was beaten so severely that Dr. Müller had to be instantly summoned. The scandal deeply affected the close-knit German community. But what disturbed people even more was the rising understanding that little Emma Richter had somehow foreseen the entire series of events. News spread quickly through the neighborhood. The pale girl with the mathematical mind had not only predicted Johann Dietrich's passing, but had also foreseen the Fieber-Kellner scandal with unsettling accuracy. People began to whisper about the strange child who sat at her window, watching and calculating and somehow knowing things that no child should know. The Richter family found themselves increasingly separated from others. Former friends avoided them at church. Children were forbidden from playing near their house, and even the shop owners in the German quarter began to treat them with barely hidden suspicion. Heinrich's job at the brewery became insecure. His fellow workers viewed him with unease, and Ernst Kellner, still recovering from his beating, made it very clear that the Richter family was no longer welcome at company social gatherings. But Emma seemed completely unaware of the rising ill will around her. She continued her daily observations, her mathematical brain constantly processing data and accurately calculating likelihoods with mechanical precision. She started keeping a leather notebook, filling its pages with numerical figures, dates, and different observations that her parents did not dare to read. The sight of their 11-year-old daughter bent over her calculations, writing in neat columns of numerical figures, filled them with a fear they could not name. As winter gave way to spring, their isolation grew deeper. The German quarter that had once felt like a comfortable home now seemed hostile and truly threatening. Hinrich began to think about the unthinkable. Leaving Milwaukee, giving up the life they had carefully built, and starting over somewhere far from the quiet talks and the fear and the terrible accuracy of their daughter's predictions. But Emma was not fully finished with her calculations. The very worst events were still to come, and her mathematical mind had already begun accurately processing the full data that would lead to the darkest secrets of all. As April arrived in Milwaukee, bringing with it the first gentle warmth after the brutal winter, Emma's notebook grew thicker with her careful notations. The leather-covered book had become her constant friend, and she filled its pages with increasingly complex calculations that went far beyond simple mathematics. Her parents caught brief glimpses of charts tracking human action patterns, tables of number sequences they could not understand, and detailed maps of the German quarter clearly marked with distinct symbols and precise measurements. The community's fear of Emma had started to show in more concrete ways. Children were forbidden from walking past the Richter house. Shopkeepers served the family very quickly and without any conversation, and even Father Koller had started limiting his interactions with them to formal church services. But Emma's isolation only seemed to sharpen her observational talents, as if the removal of normal social distractions allowed her unusual mind to focus more deeply on the mathematical patterns she strongly sensed in human actions. Dr. Friedrich Möller, the community's physician, had grown increasingly curious about Emma's skills. Unlike the worried whispers of the neighbors, Dr. Möller approached the whole situation with scientific interest. He had studied medicine in Berlin before moving to America and had seen cases of unusual mental talents in his medical work. When Hinrich Richter approached him privately, seeking medical advice about his daughter's unique condition, Dr. Müller agreed to carefully examine Emma. The examination took place on a damp Thursday morning in Dr. Miller's office above the drugstore on Water Street. Emma submitted to the doctor's questions and various tests with the same mathematical precision she used for everything else, answering each inquiry with detailed accuracy, while her gray eyes remained focused on some invisible calculation. "Emma," Dr. Mahler said in his accented English, "your father informs me you can predict when certain events will occur. Can you clearly explain to me how you successfully do this?" Emma looked at the doctor with that unsettling intensity. "I notice patterns and calculate likelihoods based on established data about people's actions. People truly believe their actions are random, but they follow mathematical sequences. When I have enough data points, I can foresee future actions with high accuracy." Dr. Müller leaned forward, intrigued despite his initial skepticism. "Can you provide me with a distinct example?" Emma consulted her notebook, flipping through pages of neat numerical notations. "Mrs. Brennan believes she is successfully keeping a deep secret, but her pattern is quite easy to see. Every Tuesday and Friday for 8 weeks, she has walked to the church at exactly 3:15 in the afternoon. But instead of going inside for prayer, she continues to the rectory and remains for precisely 43 minutes. Father Kerr's routine has also clearly changed. He has been purchasing extra candles and wine, and his evening prayers have extended by an average of 17 minutes on Tuesdays and Fridays. The correlation is statistically significant." Dr. Muller felt his breath catch sharply. The clear meaning of what Emma was suggesting about the priest and the widow was scandalous enough, but the methodical way she had documented her observations was deeply troubling. "Emma, how long have you been observing people in this distinct way?" "Always," Emma replied simply. "Since I was very small, but I only started making calculations when I learned mathematics. The patterns became much clearer then." After the thorough examination, Dr. Mueller spoke privately with Heinrich and Greta Richter. His medical experience told him that Emma's condition was neurological rather than supernatural, but he had no proper framework for fully understanding what he had observed. "Your daughter's mind works differently than other children's," he explained. "She processes information in ways that seem almost robotic. In my expert opinion, this is a medical condition, not the other things people are saying." But even Dr. Muller's scientific viewpoint couldn't lessen the growing fear that surrounded Emma's predictions. 2 days after his examination, Emma made another of her calculated announcements. "There will be a major fire at the Zimmerman house on Sunday evening. It will begin at 8:47 and spread to 3 adjacent buildings before the volunteer fire group can respond effectively. Mr. Zimmerman will not survive." Heinrich felt the familiar coldness that came with his daughter's predictions. "Emma, you must not say such things. How could you possibly know about a fire?" Emma consulted her notebook. "Mr. Zimmerman has been drinking lamp oil mixed with whiskey for 12 straight days. I observed him buying both items in quantities that are more than normal household use. His wife left for Chicago to visit her sister yesterday, which follows the pattern of wives leaving before serious domestic events occur. The chimney on their house has structural damage that I calculated based on the angle of smoke coming out and the distinct pattern of soot deposits. The likelihood of fire is 93%. Greta began to weep softly. The clinical way Emma talked about potential tragedy, as if human suffering was simply another mathematical problem to be correctly solved, frightened her more than any supernatural explanation would have. This was her own child, but she no longer recognized the cold accuracy in Emma's voice or the mechanical way she processed human pain. Heinrich made a serious choice that would cause him worry for the rest of his existence. He decided to warn Franz Zimmermann about Emma's prediction, hoping that taking action might save a life and perhaps show that his daughter's calculations could be used for good rather than simply foretelling disaster. He found Zimmermann at the brewery Saturday evening, stumbling inebriated, smelling strongly of the lamp oil Emma had mentioned. Heinrich's warning was met with aggressive laughing and crude jokes about the devil child who thinks she knows everything. But something in Heinrich's despair must have reached Zimmermann's drunken haze because he promised to be extra careful with the lamps. Sunday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth and a dry wind blowing from the west. At exactly 8:47, flames suddenly erupted from the Zimmerman house. The fire spread with terrifying speed, consuming not just the original building but 3 nearby homes before the volunteer fire group could set up an effective defense. Brand Zimmerman's body was found in his kitchen, where he had clearly fallen while trying hard to put out flames that had spread far beyond his ability to control. The accuracy of Emma's prediction, right down to the exact minute, sent huge shock waves through the German quarter. Heinrich's attempt to warn Zimmermann had been seen by several brewery workers, and news spread quickly that Emma had predicted not just the fire, but its precise timing and outcomes. The community's unease changed into open fear, and the Richter family found themselves totally shut out. But for Emma, the fire was simply another data point to be recorded in her notebook. She noted the clear connection between her prediction and the actual event, made necessary adjustments to her calculations based on the observed variables, and began processing new patterns with the same mechanical accuracy that had made her prediction possible in the first place. The worst part was that she was not finished calculating. The days following the Zimmermann fire changed the German quarter into a place of quiet fears and sideways glances. Emma's prediction had been too precise, too specific, and too correct to be ignored as simple chance. 3 families, the Bronzes, the Kohlers, and the Steiners, had lost their homes in the blaze, and the community was struggling to find places for the displaced families while trying to deal with the unsettling reality of Emma's mathematical prophecies. Heinrich found his job at the brewery had become totally untenable. His fellow workers avoided him. Conversations stopped abruptly when he walked into a room, and Ernst Kellner, still bearing tea, remarks of Wilhelm Weber's attack, made it clear that the Richter family's presence was no longer welcome in any brewery social activities. The mathematical accuracy of Emma's predictions had changed their daughter from a strange curiosity into something the community was deeply afraid to name. Emma herself seemed unaware of the growing hostility around her. She continued her daily observations, filling page after page of her leather notebook with calculations that grew increasingly complex and disturbing. She had started creating what appeared to be probability charts, tracking multiple variables at the same time, and creating predictions that reached weeks into the future. Greta found herself scared to even look at her daughter's journal, terrified of what calculations Emma might be making about their own family or their neighbors. The child who had once been her greatest happiness had become a source of constant worry. Emma's calm discussions of human tragedy, her clinical observations about people's most secret actions, and her mechanical processing of information that should have caused emotional reactions, all added to a growing sense that something fundamental had been lost or damaged in her daughter's mind. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday morning in late April. Emma was sitting at her usual place by the kitchen window, watching the street activity with her typical intensity, when she suddenly looked up at her mother with those calculating gray eyes. "Mama, there is something very wrong with the pattern today." Greta, who was getting dough ready for baking, felt her hands start to shake. "What do you mean, Emma?" Emma consulted her notebook, flipping through pages of numerical notations with practiced skill. "Every Tuesday for 11 weeks, Mrs. Brennan has walked to the rectory at exactly 3:15, but today she left her house at 2:47 and walked toward the river instead. Her behavior indicates severe EE, motional pain. Her step length decreased by 12%, and her breathing pattern was irregular. This suggests she is planning something very final." The clinical way Emma talked about Mrs. Brennan's apparent plan to take her own life filled Greta with horror. "Emma, you must not speak of such things. Mrs. Brennan is a good woman. She would never." "The mathematical likelihood is 87%, Emma interrupted with the same tone she might use to discuss the daily weather. People who drastically change established behavioral patterns while showing physical signs of distress typically make irreversible decisions within 4 hours of the pattern change. Mrs. Brennan's pattern changed 43 minutes ago. Greta felt the world spinning around her. The realization that her 11-year-old daughter was calmly predicting a neighbor's suicide with mathematical accuracy was more than she could handle. She dropped her bread dough and ran to find Heinrich, who was in their small garden behind the house, trying to find some sense of normalcy in the simple act of preparing soil for spring planting. "Heinrich, you must come quickly. Emma says Mrs. Brennan is going to harm herself. We must do something." Heinrich looked at his wife's terrified face and felt the familiar fear that had become their constant companion. They found Emma still, sitting by the window, making more notations in her notebook, as if recording a scientific observation rather than predicting a human tragedy. "Emma, tell me exactly what you observed about Mrs. Brennan." Emma looked up from her calculations. She changed from her established Tuesday pattern by 28 minutes. Her physical signs showed severe emotional distress. Based on historical data about behavioral pattern disruption, the probability of self-harm is 87%, with the highest likelihood occurring between 5 and 7 this evening. Hinrich made a decision that showed both his despair and his growing acceptance of Emma's abilities. He left the house immediately and went searching for Margaret Brennan, following the route toward the river that Emma had pointed out. He found the elderly widow standing on the dock where the fishing boats tied up, staring into the dark water with an expression of deep sadness. "Mrs. Brennan," Heinrich called softly, approaching carefully so as not to scare her. "Are you truly all right?" The elderly woman turned toward him, her eyes red with tears. "Heinrich, what are you doing here?" I was worried about you. You seem troubled recently." Mrs. Brennan's face crumpled. "I cannot bear it any longer, Hinrich. The embarrassment, the quiet talks, the knowledge that everyone knows about my weakness. Father Koller says it is a sin, but I cannot help what I truly feel for him. Better to end it now than to live with this shame." Hinrich realized with growing horror that Emma's observations about Mrs. Brennan and Father Koller had been completely correct, and that the elderly woman was indeed thinking about taking her own life rather than face the major scandal. He spent the next 2 hours calmly talking Margaret Brennan away from the river, convincing her that shame was not worth dying for and that the community's judgment would eventually fade away. When he returned home that evening, he found Emma making final notations in her notebook. "Mrs. Brennan did not follow through with her plan," she observed clinically. "The intervention changed the probability calculation. I will need to adjust my variables for future predictions that involve a third party interfering." Heinrich stared at his daughter in disbelief. Emma had somehow observed and calculated a suicide attempt that had not yet actually happened. And now she was treating his intervention as simply another data point to be added into her mathematical models. The realization that his 11-year-old daughter was not just predicting tragic events, but studying human suffering with scientific detachment, filled him with a horror he could not easily describe. That night, as Emma slept peacefully in her narrow bed, Hinrich and Greta made a decision that would permanently change their lives. They could not continue living in Milwaukee. Emma's abilities, whatever they truly were, had made their life in the German quarter impossible, but more troubling was the rising understanding that their daughter was not just observing and calculating human actions, but seemed to be losing connection with the emotional reality of the tragedies she predicted. They began making quiet plans to leave Wisconsin, to find a place where Emma could live without being feared, and where her unusual mind might find a different creative outlet. But Emma was not finished with her calculations, and the most disturbing revelations were still to come. As Hinrich lay awake that night, listening to the sounds of the German quarter settling into silence, he could not shake the feeling that his daughter's mathematical mind had uncovered secrets that went far deeper than simple adultery and suicide attempts. The accuracy of her observations, the clinical way she discussed human tragedy, and the growing complexity of her calculations all strongly suggested that Emma had been watching and recording much more than anyone realized. And the most terrifying part was that she was still calculating. The revelation that would expose the darkest secret of Milwaukee's German quarter came on the first day of May 1873. Emma had been making increasingly complex calculations in her notebook, creating elaborate charts that tracked the movements and actions of virtually every grown-up in their community. Her parents had started carefully packing their belongings in preparation for leaving Wisconsin, hoping to escape before Emma's next prediction could destroy more lives. But that morning, as spring sunlight streamed through their kitchen window, Emma made an announcement that would shake the very foundations of their community. "Papa," she said, looking up from her journal with those calculating gray eyes, I need to show you something very important. My calculations have revealed a pattern that clearly explains everything. Hinrich, who had been fearing this moment for weeks, reluctantly sat down across from his daughter. Emma opened her journal to a section filled with detailed charts, maps, and number sequences that looked more like the work of a trained investigator than an 11-year-old child. For 26 months, I have been carefully observing and recording the action patterns of 43 grown-ups in our community. Emma began with her characteristic clinical accuracy. Initially, I believed the patterns were random changes, but when I analyzed the total data systematically, I discovered clear connections that indicate organized criminal activity. Hinrich felt his blood run cold. Emma, what exactly are you saying? Emma consulted her charts with the methodical accuracy of a mathematics professor. 7 men in our community have been secretly meeting every Wednesday at midnight in the basement of Kellner's brewery. I calculated their movement patterns based on observed changes from normal behavior, time differences in their stated activities, and physical evidence of their gatherings. She pointed to a detailed map of the German quarter marked with various symbols and precise measurements. Mr. Steinberg tells his wife he works late on Wednesday nights, but he leaves the factory at exactly the same time as the other 6 men and walks to the brewery using a route that successfully avoids the main roads. The pattern has been consistent for 26 months, with only 3 exceptions that clearly connected with illness or family emergencies. Heinrich stared hard at the map, recognizing the names Emma had marked. Wilhelm Weber, Ernst Kellner's brother Hans Zimmermann, Franz Zimmermann's cousin Otto Steinberg, Klaus Brennan, Margaret's deceased husband until 3 months ago, Gustav Wolff, and Hermann Kruger. Emma, how could you possibly know about secret meetings? I observe everything, Papa, every night, every movement, every change from established patterns. Emma turned to another page filled with numerical calculations. But the meetings are not the most significant discovery. My calculations indicate these 7 men have been involved, in systematic theft from the brewery operations with estimated losses of approximately $47,000 over 26 months. Hinrich's hands began to shake. The sum Emma mentioned represented more money than most families in the German quarter would earn in a whole lifetime. How could you possibly calculate such a thing? Emma's explanation was delivered with the same mathematical accuracy she used for all her observations. I noticed differences between the officially reported beer production figures and the actual output I calculated based on observed deliveries, ingredients purchased, and waste disposal patterns. The difference clearly indicated systematic theft, but I needed to find the specific people involved. She pointed to detailed charts tracking the action patterns of the 7 men. These individuals all showed consistent patterns of increased spending that did not match their reported incomes. Mr. Weber bought new furnishings worth approximately $300. Mr. Steinberg sent money to his relatives in Germany. I observed him at the post office 12 times with packages too large for normal letters. The pattern was consistent across all 7 men. Heinrich realized he was looking at undeniable proof of a criminal conspiracy that his 11-year-old daughter had uncovered through her obsessive observations and mathematical analysis. But Emma was not finished with her revelations. The theft operation required inside knowledge of brewery security and access to the financial records, Emma continued. My calculations indicated the involvement of someone in management. The patterns pointed to Ernst Kellner himself as the person organizing the theft ring. The final piece of Emma's revelation hit Heinrich like a physical blow. Ernst Kellner, the brewery owner who had been slowly pushing them out of the community, was allegedly the main planner of a major theft operation involving 7 men from their own neighborhood. The accuracy of Emma's analysis, the mathematical certainty of her conclusions, and the detailed evidence she had collected through months of observation all pointed to a truth that was both unbelievable and terrifying. "Emma, these are extremely serious claims. Are you fully certain of your calculations?" Emma consulted her notebook one final time. "The mathematical likelihood is 96%. But, Papa, there is something else. Something that explains why Mr. Kellner has been trying to separate our family from the community." Heinrich felt his chest tighten with fear. "What exactly do you mean?" "Mr. Kellner knows that I observe everything. He has been watching me watching him. 3 weeks ago he approached our house twice late at night and stood outside for 17 minutes each time, as if calculating whether I might have discovered his secret. His behavior indicates he strongly suspects I know about the theft operation." The realization that Emma's mathematical abilities had not only uncovered a criminal conspiracy, but had also made her a clear target, filled Heinrich with a terror he had never experienced. His daughter's obsessive observations and calculating mind had revealed secrets that powerful men would kill to protect. Emma closed her journal and looked at her father with those unsettling gray eyes. "Papa, my calculations clearly indicate that we are in serious danger. Mr. Kellner and the others cannot allow me to continue making observations. The mathematical likelihood of them taking harsh action against our family is 84%, with the highest likelihood occurring within the next 72 hours. Heinrich understood that Emma's final prediction was not about fire or suicide or adultery, but about their own family's immediate survival. Her mathematical mind had uncovered a truth that made their continued existence in Milwaukee impossible, and the men she had exposed would not hesitate to get rid of the one witness who could destroy them all. That evening, Heinrich made a decision that would save his family's lives. Using the detailed proof Emma had collected in her notebook, he approached Dr. Mueller under the cover of darkness and shared Emma's discoveries. The physician, who had already been disturbed by Emma's unusual abilities, was shocked by the mathematical accuracy of her criminal investigation. "Heinrich, if what Emma has calculated is true, we are looking at the biggest theft operation in Milwaukee's history," Dr. Mueller whispered as he examined the journal by lamplight in his office. "But more importantly, if Kellner suspects that Emma knows, your family is in deadly danger." Dr. Mueller agreed to help them escape Milwaukee immediately. Using his medical connections, he arranged for Heinrich to receive an emergency job offer at a brewery in distant Minnesota, providing a perfect cover for their sudden departure. They would leave that very night before Emma's 72-hour prediction could come to pass. As the Richter family loaded their few belongings into Dr. Muller's wagon under the cover of darkness, Emma made one final observation that would cause Heinrich anxiety for the rest of his existence. "Papa, in approximately 6 months, the theft operation will be discovered through other external means. Mr. Kellner will face the full law, but 3 of the 7 men will not survive the investigation. The mathematical likelihoods are quite clear." Heinrich shuddered as he helped his daughter into the wagon. Even as they fled for their lives, Emma was calculating the future results of the conspiracy she had successfully uncovered. Her prediction would prove accurate in every single detail. By winter, a federal investigation would expose the theft ring. Ernst Kellner would be arrested and found guilty, and 3 of his accomplices would die under suspicious circumstances that were never fully explained. But on that dark May night in 1873, as their wagon slowly rolled through the sleeping streets of Milwaukee's German quarter, Heinrich could only think about how his daughter's extraordinary mathematical mind had both saved their lives and totally destroyed the only home they had ever known in America. The Richter family disappeared from Milwaukee in the early hours of May 2, 1873, leaving behind only quiet stories and unresolved questions. Dr. Mueller reported that they had received an urgent family summons back to Bavaria, but the few people who cared to check noted that no ship passenger records could be found to confirm their departure from America. What the residents of the German quarter never learned was that Heinrich, Greta, and Emma Richter had indeed traveled to Minnesota, where Heinrich found steady work at a small brewery in the town of New Ulm. Dr. Müller had sworn to keep their exact location secret, understanding that Emma's mathematical abilities would always make her a clear target for those who feared the exposure of their secrets. In New Ulm, the Richter family tried hard to build a new life far from the quiet talks and fears that had forced them from Milwaukee. Heinrich found the brewery work familiar and satisfying, while Greta slowly began to rebuild the domestic routines that had been shattered by Emma's disturbing predictions. But Emma herself remained completely unchanged. Her mathematical mind continued to watch, calculate, and record human action patterns with the same mechanical accuracy that had made her both famous and deeply feared. Dr. Müller maintained a steady correspondence with the family for several months, reporting that Emma had started working with a mathematics professor at a nearby college who was intensely fascinated by her unusual abilities. The professor, a German immigrant named Dr. Hermann Weiss, approached Emma's condition from a scientific rather than supernatural viewpoint, helping her to understand and effectively channel her observational skills in ways that might prove helpful rather than destructive. But the most significant revelation came in November of 1873, when Dr. Müller received a letter from Heinrich containing Emma's final prediction about the Milwaukee theft operation. As she had calculated with mathematical precision, federal investigators had indeed uncovered Ernst Kellner's conspiracy. Kellner was arrested and found guilty of stealing over $50,000 from multiple brewery operations. Wilhelm Fieber, who had been Kellner's main accomplice, was found dead in his home under circumstances that were officially ruled a suicide, but which many suspected was something far more sinister. Otto Steinberg and Hermann Krüger also died within weeks of the investigation's conclusion, Steinberg in what appeared to be a drunken accident, and Krüger from what Dr. Müller diagnosed as a sudden heart attack that showed suspicious similarities to the symptoms of certain poisons. Emma's mathematical analysis of the criminal conspiracy had been correct in every detail, including her clear prediction that not all of the conspirators would survive the eventual discovery of their crimes. The accuracy of her calculations, even from hundreds of miles away and months in advance, confirmed what Heinrich had come to understand about his daughter's extraordinary and terrifying abilities. The German quarter of Milwaukee slowly recovered from the scandal and tragedy of 1873. The brewery theft investigation brought unwanted attention from federal authorities, but it also exposed a level of corruption that had been quietly harming the community for many years. New families moved into the houses left empty by death and departure, and the close-knit community gradually rebuilt itself around more honest principles. But the story of Emma Richter, the pale girl with the calculating gray eyes, who could predict death and expose secrets through mathematical observation, became a permanent part of the neighborhood's quiet folklore. Parents used her story to caution their children about the dangers of knowing too much, while grown-ups quietly wondered what other secrets might be hiding behind the ordinary faces of their neighbors' lives. Father Koller, who had initially blessed Emma's abilities as divine gifts, later confessed to Dr. Müller that the girl's mathematical predictions had shaken his faith in ways he could not easily explain. The priest had begun to question whether some knowledge was simply too dangerous for human minds to fully possess, and whether Emma's condition represented a blessing or a severe curse that had been visited upon their community. Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in Milwaukee's German quarter intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who deeply loves dark mysteries. Press that like button to fully support our content, and do not forget to join to never miss stories exactly like this. Let's find out together what happens next in the most disturbing historical cases America has to offer. Dr. Müller's final letter to the Richter family was written in the spring of 1874, nearly a full year after their departure from Milwaukee. In it, he reported that the German quarter had mostly returned to normal, but that Emma's story continued to circulate in quiet conversations among the older residents. He also shared a disturbing new finding that had emerged during the federal investigation of the brewery theft. Government investigators had discovered that Emma's notebook, which Hinrich had left with Dr. Müller as undeniable proof, contained mathematical calculations that extended far beyond the immediate criminal conspiracy. Emma had apparently been tracking and carefully analyzing action patterns throughout the entire German immigrant community, creating detailed profiles of dozens of families and predicting future events with remarkable accuracy. The federal investigators, who were professionally trained in criminal analysis, were both impressed and deeply disturbed by the sophistication of Emma's observational methods. "Your daughter's mind works in ways that professional investigators might envy," Dr. Muller wrote. "But I confess that I am extremely grateful she is far from Milwaukee. The accuracy of her observations and the mathematical certainty of her predictions represent a type of knowledge that I greatly fear is too dangerous for any community to fully possess." The final official mention of Emma Richter in any historical record comes from a brief note in the New Ulm College Mathematics Department records from 1875. Professor Hermann Weiss reported that his special student had shown unheard-of abilities in statistical analysis and behavioral prediction, but that her family had decided to move once again for personal reasons. After that final entry, Emma Richter disappeared from history as completely as she had vanished from Milwaukee on that dark night in May of 1873. What happened to the girl who could calculate human actions with mathematical accuracy remains completely unknown. Some researchers have suggested that families like the Richters, possessing children with unusual mental abilities, deliberately maintained their anonymity to fully protect themselves from both scientific exploitation and community persecution. Emma's story represents one of the few documented cases where such abilities were officially recorded in enough detail to truly understand their scope and possible outcomes. This mystery shows us that the human mind remains one of our biggest puzzles, fully capable of developing extraordinary abilities that challenge our basic understanding of intelligence, observation, and prediction. In 1873, Emma Richter's mathematical approach to human behavior was seen as either divine or demonic. But modern science recognizes that conditions like savant syndrome, autism spectrum disorders, and hypothymesia can indeed create minds that process information in ways that seem almost supernatural to those who do not fully understand the neurological processes involved. What do you personally think of this story? Do you believe everything was fully revealed? Or do you think Emma's abilities extended even further than what we discovered? Leave your comment below and let us know if you've ever met someone with similar extraordinary mental abilities. If you deeply enjoyed this tale and want more frightening stories exactly like this, join, press the alert symbol, and please share with someone who loves complex mysteries. These historical cases powerfully remind us that the most frightening truths are often concealed right out in the open, patiently waiting for the right mind to calculate their terrible secrets. The true case of Emma Richter clearly shows that sometimes the most terrifying discoveries come not from supernatural forces, but from the constant application of mathematical logic to common human behavior. In a world where we sincerely believe our secrets are safe, the presence of minds capable of such accurate observation and calculation powerfully reminds us that privacy may be nothing more than an illusion, and that the distinct patterns we think we are successfully hiding may be entirely visible to those who know precisely how to look and exactly how to count.